Well, hello there, friends. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 23rd of July, 2025. Yesterday, Mike Johnson shut down the House of Representatives for summer vacation early to avoid allowing Democrats to bring a vote to the floor demanding the release of the Epstein files. This story is not going away, and there are even more details that we need to talk about today. We have a lot of questions about how investigations work, and I want to walk you all through particularly traditional document review processes, because there's a lot of confusion out there about how documents are handled in investigations and litigation. And we got a couple other things we have to talk about, like Alina Habba getting fired by the judges in the District of New Jersey, only to have her replacement, who was nominated by the judges, legally fired by Pam Bondi. There's a lot more to talk about there. It's a crazy day, as always. All right. For those of you who are new here, I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I was a Wall Street and human rights lawyer for 15 years. Now I run the Gaia Leadership Project, where we work with people who are trying to have as big an impact as possible on the world right now for positive good, and where we work with leaders who are really here to make huge change. I am today, for our visually challenged viewers, wearing a gold, I don't know what this is, satin top. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I'm in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, and I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so I have to say something just in relation to this entire crazy Epstein situation. And this, I said this yesterday, and I said it late last week, and but I'm going to say it a little differently this morning, and it's this. The longer this goes on, and the deeper this cover-up goes, the more obvious it becomes that however Trump is involved in this is really, really ugly, dark, and probably criminal. A few other commentators have been saying, it's really obvious he's guilty of something incredibly serious based on how they're all reacting. And my sense of that is just like deepening by the day. The fact that the Speaker of the House of Representatives dismissed the House until September to avoid voting on a bill to release the Epstein files is astonishing. And part of the reason why he had to do that was because there were enough Republicans wanting the files released that it would have passed. So it's not just Democrats who were going to bring it to the floor, although they were the sponsors. It's actually also a resolution that would have been co-sponsored by Republicans. So we're in a situation now where it's not just Trump and his inner circle covering something up. It's also the Speaker of the freaking House. It's big chunks of the GOP. And what that tells me is that there is an awful lot that they are very afraid of the public learning about. We may not know the details, but we can tell by how they're acting that this is extremely serious shit. Not that it wasn't serious to begin with, right? We're talking about a massive ring run by Jeffrey Epstein of the sexual trafficking of children for really rich men in America. I mean, horrifying to begin with. But we have like new evidence breaking what feels like every hour about Trump's deep involvement in this. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Yesterday, Andy Kaczynski, who many of you may know from CNN under the blog he writes called K-File, discovered by reviewing archival footage from the 80s and the 90s of events that featured Trump, that there is way more photographic evidence of Trump and Epstein together than we previously knew. So, for instance, we now have footage since yesterday of Epstein's presence at Donald Trump's second wedding. We have additional footage of Epstein and Trump at various events around New York City. I know that we know from the statements that were made of Epstein saying in his final interview that he was Donald Trump's best friend, of Trump saying 15 years ago that he knew Epstein really well and he had taste for younger women. We know from all of this that they were really intimate best buddies. And then we got the letter released by the Wall Street Journal on Friday that was essentially Trump's love letter to Epstein on his 15th birthday with pornographic diagrams written on it. I mean, the evidence just keeps spiraling and spiraling and spiraling as if they were joined at the hip. We know from that particular letter that Trump described them sharing a wonderful secret. So the more we learn, the worse it gets, okay? And On top of it, I discussed yesterday how my friend Allison Gill has been talking to people who were involved in reviewing the Epstein files inside the DOJ and the FBI. This is off the record, but AG is very good at this and very trusted now, in part because she has these great relationships with ex-FBI agents. Late yesterday, she wrote another piece where now she has multiple folks who were inside the investigation on behalf of Trump's DOJ, talking about the fact that there are no protocols in place right now for protecting the victims in the way these documents are being rushed and reviewed. They're being reviewed so fast that 1,000 people have had unfettered access to graphic, illegal child sexual abuse videos and photographs. I personally will just say, the thing that I've been thinking about, you all know this because we talked about last week, is these victims, right? And I think this is something that, by the way, when people who are like calling for the immediate release of everything or are asking questions about why the Biden administration didn't release these files, this is something that people need to think about, okay? These are children in sexually exploitative photographs and videos where they are being molested and raped. There is a reason why, for instance, the Biden DOJ may have decided that it was in the best interest of protecting these children when they didn't release the files, right? Even to the extent that we are calling for them to be released now because of Trump's obvious involvement in all of this, there has to be a protocol to protect the names and the identities of the victims, because there are hundreds, if not thousands of girls who we don't know about right now. And there are pictures and videos of them in these files, okay? So one of the things that AG has learned is that there's been unfettered access, and that actually it's been extremely disturbing to the people reviewing it. And also that, it started inside the FBI and then moved to the DOJ, which means that it's under the direct control of Pam Bondi, how all of this is being reviewed. Now, I want to say something about this from the standpoint of document review, as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, because there are a lot of people on the Patreon feed and also following me on Blue Sky who seem to be under the impression that what's being reviewed are hard copy documents, like, a piece of paper, right? That's what's being reviewed. So let me just take you back a ways to my earlier litigation days. Okay. Back in the early aughts, late 90s, early aughts, document review for purposes of litigation changed, okay? It used to be that, you would go to a location, you would sit in a warehouse, and you would go through boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of hard copy documents. Starting in the late 90s and the early aughts, a process called OCR came into play, which essentially allowed for documents to be scanned and their contents indexed, okay? And the technology was really rough when it started. There was a whole thing that happened in terms of how attorneys had to manage this, because sometimes the way things were OCR'd wasn't totally accurate, and you had to do a backup review on paper. That technology has advanced dramatically in the last 25 years. Every piece of evidence that is being reviewed in the Epstein files, quote unquote, is electronically maintained. I don't have to have any inside information to know that, okay? No one does document review anymore on hard copy documents. That hasn't been true, by the way, for at least the last, let me think about this. When was the last time I did some document review? It hasn't been true for at least the last 15 years. Every single thing has been reviewed on a computer screen, okay? So there's no way for the DOJ lawyers to go in and rip up documents, okay? Everything is being maintained on hard drives that are then maintained on backup servers that are then maintained on backup tapes in most instances, all right? So this whole thing of how do we not know that they're not destroying evidence? Well, here's how we know. The backup protocols, particularly for litigation, particularly inside the DOJ, particularly for purposes of any form of document retention these days, by the way, every email you ever send is recorded somewhere. There's not a chance in hell that they can destroy everything that's out there, let alone an individual document. All right. So nobody needs to worry about that. And I personally will just say that while I am deeply suspicious of a lot of what is happening inside the DOJ right now, one thing that I'm not concerned about is the material being destroyed, because it is incredibly difficult to do that once it has been maintained, once it's been scanned, saved, maintained on a server. There's so many different locations in which these materials will live, all right? So I'm not worried about it. And, people are making jokes about driving around in a truck with a huge magnet. That will not do it, Okay, like, again, I have to remind you all, lots of things to worry about this moment. This happens to not be one. Okay, what I'm more worried about, if we're going to talk about this, is like either them releasing illegal child sexual assault material into the public domain without any protections for the victims, or for that matter, not releasing anything at all. Okay, those are really like the two realms of concern that I have here. I am not concerned about, documents being shredded. We're like way past that moment in history. And so everybody should kind of like let that option go of your fears. Okay. Now I want to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell a little bit more. We talked about her yesterday. Okay. So a bit. So I just have to like, again, remind everybody, in case you weren't here on the broadcast yesterday, that she's not in prison, okay, because she helped Jeffrey Epstein recruit his victims. She's also in prison because she committed sexual assaults against children, okay? And I personally am having a really hard time right now with people who are calling for her to have immunity. I don't think she should have immunity. Okay, I actually see her in many ways as just as evil as he is, particularly because her role as a woman and his putative girlfriend allowed these girls to trust her. And then she served them up on a silver platter for Jeff, his friends, and herself in some instances to abuse them, rape them, mistreat them, photograph them, videotape them, and ruin their lives. Okay, she does not deserve immunity. She doesn't deserve immunity. She doesn't deserve to be released from prison so that like America can satisfy its salacious desire for more information. And I'm just going to tell you something else. She can't be trusted. This is the other thing that people are forgetting, right? She has lied literally for decades about her involvement in this. And then on top of it, she has also, since her conviction, because she's serving 20 years in the federal pen right now for sex trafficking, appealed her conviction. So she's not going to walk out the door and be like, here, I confess all the horrible things that I did and that Jeffrey did with me. Here, I confess all these horrible things that I saw Donald Trump do. She's not going to do that. Like, again, this is something that people really need to get clear on, okay? She is someone who participated as an active participant in a decades-long sex trafficking ring of children, okay? She's not reliable. She's at best a sociopath. At worst, she's a psychopath. And in any instance, she's a liar. So people need to just like step away from this, right? Like wholly step away from the idea that somehow Ghislaine Maxwell is going to like blow the doors off this thing and blow it wide open. That's not going to happen. And I'm just going to say something else. We don't need that, actually, right? We don't need her to do that. The DOJ has, I'm not joking about this because I looked at the list that has been submitted in court, thousands of videotapes and photographs of Jeffrey Epstein and his friends and what they did to these kids. Thousands of photographs and videotapes that have been designated as child sexual abuse material. We don't need her. And he's in there. That's the other thing is like, we know this. AG has confirmed this, that one of the things the DOJ and the FBI are doing is they review these files is every single person who reviews them has to designate in an Excel spreadsheet the document where they found a reference to Donald Trump or saw him or whatever else is in there. And they have to send it in at the end of their document review shift. So we already know he's in the files. Like we actually don't need her lying, likely self-interested testimony, trying to get out of prison or get a pardon kind of situation. We don't need her. And I don't want to give her anything. I don't think that anything she's going to say is going to be of value anyhow. So that's my 2 cents on that. Okay. Now we have to talk for a second about one other angle here, because there's another development that came up this morning concerning, and I hope it's Ron Wyden. I have like my memory this morning, right as I was getting ready to hit the live button here, went, wait a minute, was it Ron Wyden? There was breaking news this morning that a senator, I think it's Ron Wyden, had a year ago asked for investigations into how Epstein funded, where all his money came from, funded all of his sex trafficking, particularly with regard to how money was laundered or loaned through major banks, okay? This is a really interesting angle to me as a former white collar and securities litigator, because one of the things that is very clear to me here, and this is something we all should be thinking about in terms of like big picture stuff when it comes to like what comes after this, if our laws concerning fraudulent transactions transactions that have to be flagged by banking institutions were actually upheld and prosecuted and maintained in the way that they are supposed to be, Jeffrey Epstein would not have been able to do what he's done. Because there are very serious questions. Like, I've had questions about this for years, probably from like the first time that I heard about Jeffrey Epstein as a New Yorker. I've had really serious questions about how he got his money, because keep in mind that Jeffrey Epstein's first job was as a substitute teacher at a major private school in Manhattan. Okay. Now, I know, by the way, I'm just going to point this out. Yes, Bill Barr's dad did run that school. That means nothing. Please don't go off on these bizarre conspiracy theory tangents that somehow Bill Barr's dad hiring Jeffrey Epstein for a part-time job for a couple of years, all the way back, in the late 80s, early 90s, somehow makes Bill Barr complicit in this. Now, Bill Barr may be complicit in other ways, but like these tangential strings, I just have to say, really bother me. Like the school where Jeffrey Epstein was a part-time teacher, so many celebrities and politicians have gone to this school. It doesn't mean that all of them were involved in covering up Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Okay. But again, there are things about this. Okay. So Jeffrey Epstein gets hired as a part-time substitute math teacher at this school. That's his first job. In the matter of a few years, okay, he goes from that to like $140 million in investments from the Victoria's Secret chairman. How did that money get to him? Why was that money given to him? What was he doing with all that money? Why weren't those transactions flagged? Because they're weird, right? Like you just dump a huge amount, millions of dollars into the laps of somebody with no investment experience. Why? And there are dollar amounts of transactions in any event that are supposed to be flagged by our banking institutions for investigation, for things like connections to terrorism, for things like potential fraudulent or money laundering transactions. So Ron Wyden stepping back and asking questions about this, which apparently began a year ago, is a really curious angle, because when you track back the money, you're going to learn some very significant things about who Jeffrey Epstein was involved with and why. And I personally think that this is kind of like an unexplored angle, right? Who was paying Jeffrey Epstein? Who was funding his lifestyle? Who gave him enough money to buy a private rape island, right? These are really big questions in a very vague and like uninvestigated arena related to him that has a lot of relevant information attached to it. So as of, I think it was late yesterday or this morning, that request has been reinitiated by Ron Wyden. And this one's going to be tough because it's directly to Pam Bondi. It's like, you should investigate these transactions to see whether or not our banking institutions have let us down. Again, it's another opportunity where she's either going to have to decide to engage in a cover-up or, she's going to have to find some way to finagle it in order to maintain what they're doing right now inside the DOJ. But I want to make something really clear to everybody, okay? My suspicion, again, I'm going to put a huge speculation banner over this, okay? But my suspicion about this is that part of what was happening with Epstein was other folks engaged in the sex trafficking operation, paying him for access to children or paying him for blackmail. And so these huge transactions reveal something about the identities of the people that were involved in these crimes. And do I think it's possible that Trump is in there? Hell yes, I do. That's one of my big questions. How is Trump involved with Jeffrey Epstein financially? And what does that tell us? Okay. And by the way, for somebody who just mentioned this in the con artist in the comments, somebody just said Epstein was a con artist. No, I actually don't think that's the case. I think this was very intentional actions designed to make himself rich, to fund these operations in conjunction, in conspiracy in some instances, with the individuals who wanted access to these girls. So it's a lot. It's a lot. Okay. Somebody asked me a question about, we spoke a little bit about why the Biden administration may not have released the file. Somebody asked, well, why didn't they prosecute Trump if there's something criminal in those files? So we have no idea what the Biden DOJ did with any of this after Epstein died. Okay. We don't know if they, and by the way, I just have to remind you all, Jeffrey Epstein died in 2019. It was before Biden was elected. All right. He died under the first Trump administration. All right. We don't know what Biden's DOJ did with these files, right? And I just have to remind everybody, it is not normal. Like, I want people to be really clear on this. If the DOJ engages in an investigation from which an indictment does not emerge, they don't release those materials to the public. In fact, there are prohibitions in certain parts of the federal code that say, like, you can't introduce evidence or you can't release material. Like, there's sort of like a prosecutorial standard about this if it implicates somebody in something for which it doesn't rise to the level of a crime. So the DOJ doesn't like close an investigation and be like, here, general public, take all of the material we collected. That's not how it works, okay? Also, if there's ongoing investigations, there's supposed to be a prohibition on discussing or releasing, for that matter, anything related to those ongoing investigations by the DOJ. This is one reason why, like, we only ever saw Jack Smith like once in a press conference. So this whole thing of like, why didn't Biden do the right thing is like, first of all, a right-wing talking point. Second of all, like taking the bait for a straw man argument that doesn't actually exist. And it's a distraction from the real issue of the moment, which is like, Trump's in the files. What are they hiding? Why are they covering it up? Okay. So one other thing that I just want to mention on this, though, is like, please also keep in mind that there is this thing called prosecutorial discretion. And what that is it's a concept in the law that says prosecutors have the discretion to decide whether or not to try to indict somebody, whether or not to try to prosecute somebody. They can look at a given case and they can say, well, the evidence really isn't that strong over here, so we're not going to do it. Or for that matter, they can look at a case and say, yes, we have very clear and obvious evidence that the former president at that time was engaged in the sexual abuse of minors 20 years ago, but we are not going to prosecute him for it right now because it will be targeted as a political prosecution. That would also fall within the scope of prosecutorial discretion. Now, do I necessarily agree with that determination if that is what happened inside the DOJ? No. But it is something that, again, because it falls within the discretionary power of a prosecutor, is really not subject to any sort of formal legal review. All right. So we don't know what happened. We honestly don't know what happened inside Biden's DOJ, but it could have gone down for any number of reasons. They want to protect the victims. They don't have people who are willing to testify. They've got Ghislaine Maxwell being prosecuted and convicted. And when that's over, they're moving on to others. The DOJ attorney, the U.S. attorney for a given district may have said, I don't know that this is the best idea right now. It might reflect badly on the president. Not exactly the way you're supposed to do it, but possible, right? There's all sorts of reasons why it could have gone down, but also none of this matters. Like this whole thing of Biden, why didn't Biden do this? Why didn't Biden release the files? Why didn't Biden's DOJ prosecute him? I'm like, focus on the current moment. Keep your eyes on the ball, right? Look at what's happening right now. Pam Bondi is the attorney general. She can release the files anytime she wants. Like, who cares what Biden did? If she thinks that they're so damning for Democrats, let her release the freaking files. Again, so this whole thing of Biden, like some of you have been getting this from other people or watching Fox News. I truly think that line has to be kind of dropped. Okay. Somebody asked a question about FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. So FOIA is an act that allows you to ask for documents or information from the federal government by letter, okay? And there is, in general, this principle that, information that is maintained by the federal government should generally be accessible to the public. But FOIA has its limits, okay? So let me just, because I've done FOIA requests, so let me just explain to you how it works. When you file a Freedom of Information Act request, you file it by letter and you have to send it to a certain place depending on the agency that you're asking for it from. And the department, whatever it is, whichever agency or department you're designated for, has, I believe, at least it was the last time I did it, 120 days, so 6 months, to respond to the letter, okay? And they can respond to the letter by giving you stuff. They can respond to the letter by saying, we're not giving you stuff because we're invoking this privilege. One of those privileges, by the way, would be investigatory process privilege. We here at the Department of Justice have ongoing investigations that this material is implicated in, and we're not going to give it to you, okay? Or they can just flat out refuse. I mean, usually they have a reason for that, but they can do that. After that 6-month letter comes in, you have an opportunity to then file an action in federal court challenging, if you don't get what you want, their reasons for not giving you the information. And that then usually involves a discovery process. Sometimes it involves a judge reviewing the materials in what's called in camera, meaning like in his, her, or their chambers with none of the parties present, to determine if the privileges that were asserted were properly applied. It's a whole process. And I'm just going to tell you all right now that I do not think that a FOIA request for this material, now AG has asked for FOIA requests in other arenas and had some success with that, but AG's also got lawyers who are willing to do this work, who presumably she's paying. I do not think that a FOIA request directed to the DOJ for the materials in the Epstein files is going to bear fruit anytime soon. And I also just have to say the federal court litigation is expensive. This is not a situation where somebody's going to take it on contingency. You might be able to find somebody who's going to take it, I don't know, for pro bono reasons, but it might be a stretch. So I do not encourage anyone to just and I said this before when Glenn Kirshner threw this out there, I happen to disagree with him earlier in the year. I don't think filing FOIA requests en masse is a good idea. In part because they're likely to be shut down. Certain legitimate privileges will apply to some of the materials, and the process takes a really long time. Okay. All right. Talked about that. Okay. We have to talk about what happened yesterday here in my current state of New Jersey. I live right outside of New York City in New Jersey. Okay. So many of you know that Alina Habba, real estate lawyer extraordinaire who lost every single case that she represented Trump on, was named as the interim U.S. attorney for the District Court of New Jersey a few months back. And since that time, she has indicted LaMonica McIver. She has condemned Ross Baraka and then, dropped his arrest and prosecution. And she's done a whole series of other things here in the state that basically everybody in New Jersey objects to en masse. So the thing about a U.S. attorney position is that it requires Senate confirmation. And if after a certain window of time you have not been confirmed by the Senate, there is a law that allows for a really interesting runaround. Okay, so bear with me on this. If the term expires and you have not been confirmed by the U.S. Senate, the judges in a given district can vote to not renew your appointment. This is legal, okay? I just have to point this out because the end run of this story claims otherwise. This is a totally legal, legitimate procedure. So what happened yesterday in New Jersey was that the judges on the district court for the District of New Jersey held a private vote, and they decided to terminate Alina Habba from her interim position because this window of time had expired. Then they nominated another very experienced attorney in that U.S. attorney's office who actually had been Alina Habba's second in command, but was not a political appointment. Okay, so not appointed by Donald Trump, very experienced prosecutor. And they named her as the U.S. attorney for the District Court of New Jersey, for the District of New Jersey anyway. Okay, in Alina Habba's stead. Well done, judges on the District of New Jersey. By the way, generally perceived to be quite a liberal bench. All right, so they did this. They invoked the law as they were properly allowed to. They held a vote. They said, we're not renewing Alina Habba because she already, by the way, had been chastised by a bunch of the judges here for acting outside the scope of her authority and violating the law. And they nominated a successor, legitimate successor. Okay, Pam Bondi gets a wind of this, right, as soon as it happens. And she puts out a tweet claiming that these are rogue judges acting outside the law to interfere with the president's agenda, right? Bullshit. It's totally legal. They're not rogue. They followed the federal law that allows it to happen to the letter, okay? And then Pam Bondi fires the successor, which she does unfortunately have the authority to do. So now here in the District Court for the District of New Jersey, we have no U.S. attorney. And I have to say that the actions by Pam Bondi in choosing to fire the successor after the successor was nominated by the entire judicial bench is a true authoritarian step, because the only reason why she would do that is because, and again, I'm just going to say this is speculation, but it's pretty damn obvious, because no one but Alina Habba would be pursuing the prosecution of my representative, LaMonica McIver, who represents huge chunks of Newark and other parts of New Jersey, would not be prosecuting her under any legitimate set of facts, okay? The things that she's alleged to have done, there's videotape, right? Like, she did not commit the crimes of which she is being prosecuted. And the only reason why that prosecution is happening is because Alina Habba was the U.S. attorney, okay? So if Alina Habba is out, her successor is going to dismiss those charges. Pam Bondi says, can't do that, right? So again, I'm flagging this because please don't refer to her as Blondie. The sexism drives me crazy. There's so many reasons to kind of like critique the women in Trump's inner circle with that. And I don't want to call anybody out, but I mean, like, there's so many reasons to critique the women in Trump's inner circle without referring to their appearances. Like, it's just not cool with me. Please don't do it. Okay. The thing that I have to say about this that I think is really critical, okay, is that, as everybody knows, when we don't have people who abide by their oaths of office and abide by the Constitution working in our federal judicial system, all bets are off. And I think that we have to remember here that the way in which Pam Bondi is acting is indicative of the means by which this administration is willing to interfere with the judicial branch. We've already had threats to kind of like impeach judges, if you'll remember. We now have like Emile Beauvais having jumped another procedural hoop to potentially getting a lifetime appointment to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. We have various ways in which they are seeking to impose their will on the backstop of the federal judiciary and on the what's supposed to be independent functionality of everyone in the DOJ, which of course includes all U.S. attorneys in this country. It's really deeply troubling. And I don't know where it's going to end up, but I will tell you, like, it was a holy shit moment for me when Bondi fired Alina Habba, fired Alina Habba's successor yesterday, where I was like, oh my God. Like, the entire District of New Jersey bench voted to like not renew her and to appoint this person instead. And you're going to call these people rogue judges and then fire the person they chose? Really? So, once again, all of this from the standpoint of where we sit right now is like another indicator of what Trump's administration thinks it should be capable of doing. And they are essentially making an effort to bulldoze anyone who could potentially stand in the way of them using the law to persecute political enemies, to persecute, deport, abuse, torture, effectively kill in custody immigrants, because that's happened, right? Who will interfere with their attempts to persecute trans and non-binary people. They are railroading their way through all the backstops. And this is yet another example. I don't know what's going to happen here in New Jersey. It's bad. But, now we have this crisis of the judges who sit on this bench in this district doing their duty and saying, like, she should not be renewed. She hasn't been confirmed. She shouldn't be renewed. And we don't want her, right? Because she's been acting outside the bounds of the law. And the attorney general saying, nope. I mean, that's a constitutional crisis right there. So again, crazy times, like really, really crazy times right now. All right, that is it for today. Please subscribe to this channel if you don't already. Make sure you like this broadcast. Give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the bell notification if you want to know every time I go live. And please support this broadcast financially by becoming a paid subscriber for as little as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast over at patreon.com/resistancelive, where you get bonus broadcasts and you get to ask me questions for 3 hours before every broadcast, and I will answer them on the air or in writing. Okay. And lastly, just a quick mention that you can pick up our free guide. It's linked below already in the show notes on how you can effectively create change where you live. Please get involved. Like, this is the other thing I just want to say to everybody here. It's so critical that you get involved in doing something locally where you live to help people. Every voice matters. Every hour that you can volunteer or donation that you can make will make a difference right now. So many people are vulnerable and under threat. So please pick up that guide. That will help you get started. It will also help you carry on if you're already doing that work. And I will catch you all here tomorrow at regular time. All right. Thanks so much for your support. Drop me a comment if you're watching on the replay, and I will catch you all here real soon. Take care, everyone. All right. Bye.